All right, let's get right into it. Welcome, medical students, to this high-yield explainer on Bordetella pertussis. This is a pathogen you're absolutely going to encounter on your boards, and definitely in the wards. Most folks just know it as whooping cough or the infamous 100-day cough. Today, we're breaking down the microbiology, the clinical presentation, and the management of this incredibly relentless disease, giving you exactly what you need to understand it inside and out. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll hit etiology and pathogenesis, then clinical features and stages, move on to complications, dive into diagnostics, and wrap up with treatment and prophylaxis. We're taking some incredibly dense, raw, handwritten medical notes. You know the ones, just packed with testable facts. And we're transforming all that raw data into a clear, structured narrative to help you actually retain this stuff and ace those exams. So, Part 1. Etiology and pathogenesis, the culprit and its attack. The first crucial step is identifying our offending agent, Bordetella pertussis. Microbiologically speaking, you've got to remember this is a gram-negative rod, and specifically, pay attention here, it is non-enteric. Lock that into your memory because it is a classic board exam trap. The primary source of the infection is almost always an already infected child, and it spreads through basic droplet infection. Once those infectious droplets are inhaled, the pathogen just kind of hangs out for an incubation period of about 3 to 12 days before the real trouble begins. Now, this pathogenesis flowchart, highly testable. Step 1, the bacteria enters via the oral cavity and starts aggressively colonizing the airway. We're talking the trachea, the bronchi, and the larynx. Step 2, as it multiplies, it releases a really potent exotoxin, creatively named the Pertussis toxin. And step 3 is where the actual damage happens. That exotoxin acts like a wrecking ball, causing a rapid breakdown of the respiratory mucosal cells. The clinical result of all this cellular destruction? Acute laryngotrachobronchitis. Okay, highlight this next basic science buzzword in your brain. Beyond that mucosal breakdown we just talked about, pertussis causes what is termed striking lymphocytosis. And why does this happen? Well, the pathogen literally inhibits the entry of lymphocytes into the lymph nodes. Because they can't get into the lymph nodes where they actually belong, they essentially back up and pool in the bloodstream. That's what leads to that strikingly elevated white count when you do a blood draw. Moving on to Part 2, clinical features and stages, the 100-day progression. The disease's infamous nickname, the 100-day cough, comes from this grueling, protracted timeline that unfolds across 3 distinct stages. I mean, think about that for a second. A staggering 100 days for a child to be sick. It kicks off with a 1 to 2 week prodromal phase. This phase is sneaky, mostly because it just looks like a mild flu-like illness with a low-grade fever. Next comes the terrifying paroxysmal phase, which lasts 2 to 4 weeks. This is your classic whooping phase, where the child becomes acutely toxic and spikes a high-grade fever over 101 degrees Fahrenheit. Finally, if the patient pulls through, they enter the convalescence or recovery phase, which takes another 2 to 4 weeks as the fever and cough painstakingly start to settle down. So, let's talk about the mechanical forces behind the disease's namesake, the classical whoop. What exactly is a whoop, physiologically speaking? Well, it happens during that brutal paroxysmal phase. The child has this non-stop expiratory barking cough, which empties their lungs entirely. At the very end of that expiration, they are absolutely desperate for oxygen, so they try to sharply inhale, but they're inhaling against a closed airway. That forced, high-velocity intake of air through restricted vocal cords, that's what produces that classical whoop sound. During this intense whooping action, the extreme physical strain on the child's tiny body is just immense. If you're examining them during a coughing fit, you'll see their face become dangerously cyanosed from the lack of oxygen. The sheer intrathoracic pressure actually causes their eyes to bulge out and their neck veins to become severely engorged. The skin flushes deeply. And tragically, these relentless respiratory spasms are associated with fits, and yes, death can absolutely take place if the child exhausts their reserves or loses their airway completely. Which brings us to Part 3, severe complications beyond the cough. As a clinician, you have got to monitor pertussis patients closely for these severe secondary complications. The mucosal swelling and thick secretions can easily lead to complete airway obstruction. Plus, that localized infection can spread right down into the lungs, causing bronchopneumonia, which can then rapidly deteriorate into ARDS, or acute respiratory distress syndrome. Finally, because the toxin causes physical destruction of the bronchial cell walls, patients can develop bronchiectasis. That's a permanent, irreversible dilation of the bronchi. All right, Part 4,
Diagnostics, investigating the cough.
You essentially have two main tools at your disposal here. First, order a complete blood count, or CBC. Like we discussed earlier, this is going to reveal that classic striking lymphocytosis, because all those lymphocytes are locked out of the lymph nodes. It's a great clue. But remember, for your exams, a sputum culture remains your definitive investigation of choice. Culturing that actual gram-negative rod is how you confirm the diagnosis 100%. Now, here is a fascinating yet frustrating behavioral quirk that completely dictates our treatment limitations. The Pertussis toxin itself is actually very short-lived in the patient's system. By the time those classic symptoms finally appear in the paroxysmal phase, the toxin has already done its damage and is largely gone from the body. And because that toxin is so short-lived, administering a Pertussis antitoxin is completely non-protective. It simply does not work. You obviously can't neutralize a toxin that has already finished acting. This one critical fact changes our entire approach to disease management. We have to shift our focus entirely away from antitoxins and heavily towards supportive care and antibiotics. Finally, Part 5, Treatment and Prophylaxis, Fighting Back. Let's break down this clinical strategy. For acute treatment in a severe case, your absolute first priority is resuscitation. Think ABCs. That may literally require a tracheostomy and mechanical ventilation just to secure that obstructed airway. For the underlying infection itself, the drugs of choice are third-generation cephalosporins or macrolides. Now let's look at prophylaxis. After birth, infants get the DPT vaccine. But note this critical caveat: it does not provide 100% immunization. Because of that gap, if an unvaccinated or vulnerable person is exposed to the pathogen, we immediately initiate post-exposure chemoprophylaxis. Practically speaking, that means giving them a 1-week course of macrolides. And that brings us to a really vital clinical reality. The DPT vaccine administered at birth just doesn't provide 100% immunization. So this leaves us with a massive, ongoing challenge as future healthcare providers. How can we improve our prophylactic strategies? Whether that's maternal vaccination, tighter herd immunity, or something else, to fully shield vulnerable infants from this devastating 100-day threat. It's something you'll definitely need to think about as you move into